Commutify presents Between the Lines with Andy Keaton. Each week, we explore the challenging issues transportation demand management professionals face on their journey to transition commuters from driving alone to more sustainable, shared, and active commuting habits. Be sure to subscribe to hear next week's episode and check out our exclusive commuter playlists on Spotify. This is Between the Lines with Andy Keaton.
Hi, everyone, and welcome aboard to the fourth episode of our Keynote Fireside Chat mini-series presented by the 82 Alliance. As a reminder, in this 8-episode series, we are talking with the industry's leading experts and innovators to dive more deeply into the challenges that we face and the many ways TDM and mobility can help. It's been a little while, actually, since our last episode's been posted here with Between the Lines. We're taking a bit of a winter break. So this is a nice interlude in that break, and kind of keep an eye out. We'll be coming back from our break here pretty soon with new episodes and new content. For everyone who's sort of a regular listener of Between the Lines, this series might sound a little bit different because we're joined by a co-host here, Rob Henry. Rob is the president of the 82 Alliance, which is he's a transportation demand management certified professional and an award-winning mobility expert with over 20 years of experience in transportation, a good friend, and a big Eagles fan, which is great for this time. Well, we'll see once the episode gets posted. Hopefully I didn't just jinx it. Rob, thanks for being on.
Sure. Thanks, Andy. And no, we're going all the way. It's be a good year. Good 2023, right, Mike? Another parade in Philadelphia.
Right. I'll say I'm a little nervous now because I did have someone on an episode who is England soccer fan during the Euro competition. I think that was last year. And he said that same thing and I lost. So I'm a little nervous. But yeah, I'll fly with the Eagles. So we're going to bring Michael Carroll in just a second. He's the Deputy Managing Director for Philadelphia's Office of Transportation and Infrastructure Systems, where he leads the staff in developing strategies and implementing policies to build a safe and equitable multimodal system across Philadelphia's diverse and vibrant neighborhoods. He's also the president of the National Association of City Transportation Officials, NACTO, and he has his master's degree from my alma mater as well, UC Berkeley, go Bears. So we're going to bring you in just a second, Michael, but first, I actually wanted to talk to you, Rob. We were talking before this call and you were mentioning something you did over the break and working with your son and kind of talking and maybe getting him a little into the trains and maybe TDM a bit. But I wanted to ask you about your experience over the summer going to the museum and sort of
Sure.
what you were up to.
Yeah, Andy and I were chatting. So over in Philadelphia, we have a great institution called the Franklin Institute, and they do a little winter sort of mini train, but they have a big Baldwin locomotive that's been there for, I think, 100 plus years. But they also have an outline of kind of where things are with rail in the United States. And it's a fascinating kind of look at Northeast Corridor Line. And then it goes to talk about high-speed rail, which we have a little of, but goes into Japan and China and France and current train speeds. And what I thought was pretty cool is then he went to school and they were talking about high-speed rail in Japan, and he could talk about that he had just experienced that, and kind of got, it's always fun when kids understand kind of what you do a little bit and get a perspective on that. So it's always a fun thing to hear them talking about that and try to get a better understanding of how that impacts, and then ask, well, how come we don't have trains that fast here? Or how come we don't have this? So it was kind of a nice little way to stimulate that. And, that's what museums should do.
Yeah. No, I think that's great. I think it's pretty cool as well, pointing out the differences, and certainly Japan and East Asia as a whole have a really incredible public transit system and rail system. I mean, probably the best in the world. So pretty cool that he's able to point that out.
Yeah. So thinking about that, Mike, that got me when Andy and I were chatting with transportation in general in Philadelphia. And we've had the global pandemic, which has upset so much and changed so much. And just curious, what you're all doing and some of the changes that have come out of the pandemic in Philadelphia, and kind of what do you think the future of transportation looks like in the
This
city?
is a excellent question, Rob, and it's something I think we've been struggling with since March of 2020 in a lot of different ways. One of the things that I think is obvious to folks is that the commute patterns are different. With the hybrid schedules, we're not seeing the pre-pandemic AM rush the same way, the PM rush the same way, that regular pattern of behavior, which so much of our decision making was predicated on, for like the last 100 years, just trying to build roads that could carry that peak hour to and from, organizing public transportation in ways where there was, more service around those periods. And there was an assumption that people were kind of all coming downtown and all leaving downtown,
Mhm.
pretty much. And so just starting with passenger vehicle, mode of transportation, I think what we're trying to figure out is whether we have other opportunities since the streets aren't quite as packed with cars all the time. And so during the pandemic, we experimented quite a bit with converting the street to other uses. And I think we had some successes. There were certainly some challenges. And what we're doing right now is thinking about how to make those things, outdoor dining, maybe bringing back some sort of patterns of street closures, make them sustainable. And the things that were challenging were that at some times in some places it was kind of a free for all. It was hard to get control back of a street that we released to the public realm when we needed to maintain something, or we needed to get that back
Mhm.
in into the network to circulate vehicles or take care of other issues that cities need to take care of. And so we're looking at this. People may see news stories about streeteries, and it seems like from a restaurant's perspective, it's the end of the world that we're taking them out of the cartway, or maybe regulating them a little bit different. And there are changes. There are some facilities that's not going to be available for, but then there's going to be other opportunities for people. So making sure we focus on that is a big issue. And I'll just say the public transportation conversation is very challenging because the ridership really kind of cratered when everything shut down. And the process of, coaxing folks back is multi-pronged. It's about providing service people want and people can use, a safe and secure environment for people so they don't feel like they're, taking any risks taking public transit. And then matching the service to the demand is really, I think, the long term need there. And so that's something we're going to be focused on, I
Mhm.
think, for quite some time.
Okay.
So I think one of the things, when you see sort of this title of, deputy managing director, Philadelphia's Office of Transportation Infrastructure Systems, it's a big title. There's a lot there. I think when I was looking through your bio, one of the things that stuck out to me was this sentence I saw. It says, that you oversee more than 9,500 transit stops, 2,500 miles of street, 320 bridge structures, 450 miles of bike facilities, 1,000 Indigo bikes, 100 Indigo stations, 6,500 miles of sewers and water mains. That's a lot. So I love the numbers because it like really is like, boom, okay, there's a lot going on here. Where do you see, personally, where do you see sort of the most room for growth there? Because there's some big
Yeah.
numbers there. To me, that seems great. It seems like there's a lot there, but where do you see the most growth? And maybe it's something that's omitted. Maybe there's something that's not even in
Well,
that list that you
yeah,
might
well,
want
it's a
to say.
pretty long list of stuff. I sometimes try and trim it down a little bit, and I don't do it by myself. I should say that. There's a great team,
Right.
across the board that takes care of the actual work, and I'm just, trying to provide support to that team. So that's just for starters. But I think, one of the things that I would say, like, we're not a growing city in terms of like expanding. Like, there's a lot of development that's going on in parts of the city, and we need to keep up with that development and figure out how we serve it. But unlike some communities, it's not like we're, converting things to residential or industrial or, other uses at scale. So the infrastructure portfolio is not really going to expand too much in most cases, But I think when we think about, to go back to the last thing I was saying, when we think about what we call public transportation, we've got an opportunity to think about that expansively. And so I'm really proud of the work that we've done to stand up this Indigo bike share system, because we think that's part of the public transportation system. And it's one that checks off a lot of boxes in terms of the ways people in 2023 are going to want to get around. I mean, it's on demand, right? And you've got it sort of like as playing a role where when we think about kind of micromobility, being the last mile for other modes of transportation, it integrates well with so many other ways of getting around, so many ways you could organize your day, organize your appointments, get to work, and so forth. So we're really, I think, at the early stages of what that could be, and we've got a pretty ambitious plan to pretty much double the network. Let's say over the next mayor's administration, and that's going to be really exciting. We took a little bit different path than other cities did in terms of having a docked bike share system, which the city's involved in. And, we may explore some of the other things that folks are doing, but I think this fits really well with a older city, a denser city, a busy city like Philadelphia. So I'm just excited to see how that grows and fills in a lot of gaps for people.
Yeah, I think, and I want to get Rob, I want to get your opinions on this too, as someone who grew up in Philadelphia and still lives in the area. But I love that idea of public transit doesn't just mean buses and trains. It also means bikes and other other devices. And I think I live in Montreal, and we've got a great publicly funded bike share system here as well. And it's also a docked system, and there's no dockless bikes around. But it works great because you have enough of those stations everywhere, and it really does extend the transit network a bit. So I really appreciate it. I think that's a really interesting perspective, and excited to see that happening in Philadelphia.
So one of the things, Mike, that I thought was interesting, I hadn't been in like the center city since probably pre-pandemic, and then was down there not long ago and saw all the different bike lanes and stripings and things that were put in. One of the it's not unique to Pennsylvania, but one of our challenges is sometimes legislative restrictions. So e-scooters is a big challenge in the state. Pittsburgh had a good pilot. You guys had a pilot with our DOT on some of the bike lanes. And so how do you get around those barriers or challenges when, we want to, it sounds great, we want to do all these different forms of mobility, but then we need enabling legislation to do that. And I know you've gotten creative in some ways.
Yeah, well, persistence, I think, is the main thing. And it can be frustrating, I'll be honest with you. If I focus on the protected bike lane or separated bike lane conversations, I'm thrilled to have great partners at PennDOT who are creative and, willing to work with us to find ways to pilot things, to try things out, to learn and give things a chance. I feel like this, it's kind of a no-brainer that municipalities should have some latitude to explore these accommodations, like these really safety measures for the traveling public on state routes. And we're in a city where most of the major streets are state routes, especially as you get into center cities. So we wouldn't be able to create a complete high quality network. And that's our goal, a protected network without significantly impacting, the status quo on state routes. And we think we can do it in a positive way by not only creating safe places for people to bike, but also in some of the same instances, we can implement a number of safety measures for people who are walking around, the driving public and, people on transit, whether they're going to or from a station or they're catching the bus. And, we've got some good examples. And so Chestnut Street is one that we rolled out, it must have been about 8 years ago. And when you look at the data, it's all very favorable. When you talk to people about their experience, there's a handful of people who are frustrated now and then. much less so than in 2016 or 17. Right now, it's just part of the landscape. And generally speaking, people who remember what a free for all it was before are really happy to see it. And, we have to navigate these conversations, but that's our job as a city to do. And I just can't see a good reason why the legislature doesn't give us the ability to move forward. Frankly, I think that the interpretation of the vehicle code is incorrect, which prevents us from doing that. There's clause about what you can do when you're parking next to the curb, and right next to it something when you're parking next to the shoulder. And there's no real meaningful distinction between those two things. And so what we're doing is we're creating a safe area, a shoulder where bikes can ride. And it just happens to be in a city. And it just seems like, we've got to find a way to get this done. It just doesn't make any sense. We're still stuck on that question.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
So I want to kind of shift gears just a little bit, but I mean, it's all the same type of conversation. So we just had an episode. It was a really good episode with the executive director of the Open Mobility Foundation, Andrew Glass Hastings, and I, know that you're on the board of directors there. So it's always great to sort of get the perspective of something we just talked about from someone at really the city level. Someone who's working to implement some of these standards. And if you haven't checked out that episode, all of our listeners and everyone, make sure you go check that out. It's a really good episode. But can you talk to us a little bit more, Mike, about how you see, that work with Open Mobility Foundation, everything they're doing, impacting cities like Philadelphia?
Yeah, I'm really thrilled with the fact that organization has really taken off. Very proud to be a part of that. And, the way I see it, it is manifestation of the idea that there's always strength in numbers, right? And so we have an opportunity as cities coming together, working in that format, pulling in folks from the private sector to amplify our voices and start to, again, prepare the landscape for innovation that's going to be beneficial for urban mobility. And that's not always been a priority in the way that either innovation takes place or the way that transportation is managed. And so the contrast is, if you think about transportation, for the last 100 years or so, cities have kind of taken a back seat to what was in the interest of states and the way states saw things. I think, if we're talking about the curb bill, that's, an example of that. Sometimes that makes sense because you don't want 1,000 different vehicle codes in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. You want one vehicle code. So I get that. But within the scope of reasonable standards, reasonable standardization, you need for cities to be able to protect their interests and manage the development of ideas and the implementation of ideas in ways that are going to work and not create chaos. And if we think about the way innovation has been characterized in the last 20 years, I don't dispute the benefits, but the emphasis on disruption is appropriate in some places, but not in other places. So, I always get a little bit nervous when people say they're going to disrupt transportation. Yeah, transportation gets disrupted every time there's a traffic jam, and it's not great. Anytime there's congestion, it's not great. It's not super. So the ways that we shake things up and then make sure all the pieces land into place, it's constructive. It really supports people's lives. It makes it easier for us to manage networks. These are the things we want. And so we have an opportunity to guide that and not guide it strictly through regulation, not all the stick, but to provide incentives, to provide clarity, to create format specifications, which organize the work that the private sector is really, frankly, going to do for the most part in ways that it provides the benefits and we can minimize some of the costs. And it's a fascinating concept. And when we think about all the things that we're sort of right on the cusp of, having an opportunity to have voice and to share voice and amplify voice around what is going to work, what we see and what we need to be successful, that just has been such a thrill. And, we've implemented a pilot which it's certainly been inspired by our membership and the conversations with ON around what we call curbside reservation, smart loading. And it seems like this kind of thing is really fertile. So having partners to share ideas with is great.
Do you see, so, in the last, I don't know, maybe 15, 20 years, we talk about disruption, the Uber Lyft kind of disruption, and cities experienced the kind of e-scooter, some respects, e-bikes, not as much because they were somewhat controlled. And, I can see with all the EV funding, there are going to be areas that just put these chargers all over the place. And then you wonder in 10 years if the technology is antiquated, or
Yeah.
they're just sitting there kind of like phone booths and newspaper boxes, but you're kind of stuck. And I always, in Philadelphia, you still have some of those old horse hitching posts, which are now kind of cute
That's
and
right.
quaint, but they sat there for a long time. But thinking about how do you use data, you had a dramatic increase in delivery services with the pandemic. You have people wanting to walk more, ride their bikes more, if they can ride e-scooters in cities. How do you see cities sharing this so that they don't have to do it themselves, but they can partner with others and
Yeah.
utilize that data, or any maybe
Well,
you may have?
that's really exciting when you get the data, when you get the data. And so, one of the good things about the work that's gone into the mobility data specification, which is one of the core initiatives of the Open Mobility Foundation, is that it ensures that cities get the data. So if we're talking about micromobility, that felt to me like a game changer. So they could see what was going on pretty much as it was happening, and make sure that there was accountability and kind of make their needs clear to folks who were trying to innovate. One of the issues, I think, if we're talking about rideshare, is that the main entities in the rideshare space, so to speak, have created a little bit of a patchwork state by state, trying to get as favorable terms as possible everywhere they could. So I can't necessarily compare notes with people in California because I don't have the same authority to even look at data, that they do in terms of what types of services are being provided. And, I everyone is in business for a reason, and I appreciate that, and certainly support people's contributions. But there's some absurdity, frankly, in what people are allowed to hold back. So we've got mandates that have been in place for providing service for people with disabilities, and we have no real way of knowing whether that's happening or not. And we're not talking about a huge segment of the market here. I mean, it's pretty narrow, and it wouldn't be hard for us to compel compliance. But the way that the laws are written, we really have no teeth. And when it comes to safety inspections, this is something the parking authority is constantly wringing their hands around. They can't even really inspect the vehicles and hold dangerous vehicles back off the street, and that's something they're required to do. So these types of things, I think, sometimes get in the way of us being able to manage. But when we get the data, it's always really fascinating to see what's going on. Unfortunately, we're often in the situation of trying to translate what we see in another city, in another state, to the experience that anecdotally, we feel like we have here in Philadelphia.
Yeah, I think the way that I think, at least in America, that we sort of see it is like the private sector's job is sort of to innovate and bring in new things, and then the public sector's job is to make sure it actually works and makes
Yeah.
sense and it does something of value. But you can't, if you're not speaking the same language, if you don't have that ability to really work together at the granular level, which in tech really is just data, then it falls apart. That sort of synergy. So I appreciate that. I think that makes sense. I want to shift gears again to another place that you spend some time and dedicate some time to, NACTO. We mentioned that at the beginning when talking about your bio as well. Your role as the president of NACTO. I think many of our listeners have heard of NACTO. They probably know what it is a bit, but I'd love to hear from you a little bit more. what is NACTO? What do you see its function? What does it do in the
Yeah.
world?
Again, it's the National Association of City Transportation Officials, and it's a collection, mostly but not exclusively, especially at first, of large cities that came together and wanted to provide some counterbalance to AASHTO, the Association of State Transportation Officials, which has a long and very esteemed record in promoting transportation across the board. From planning, research, standards making. Really a very big presence throughout North America and really around the world. So that's the aspiration: is how do you compare yourself and support and complement the work that they're doing, and focus it on cities and the issues around city transportation. So, I mentioned before, like, you could go back 100 years, maybe even 150 years, and start to see how the life of moving around cities became standardized, kind of pigeonholed, and then that uniformity shifted away from what makes cities work over time and became more about what's happening between cities. You know what I mean? So the fact that we had to move people from suburbs to cities, the fact that we were introducing, uh, the internal combustion engine, and the speeds associated with that, the fact that the speed um, was freeing, that it allowed people's lives to really expand in such incredible ways, allowed the footprint of a metropolitan area to expand in such incredible ways, and that needed to be regulated and planned for at a state level by these state highway administrations, state bureaus of highways, took something away from cities in the wash, and it took the focus on the pedestrian away. It took the public use of the right of way away, because although it could work fine on Market Street or South Broad, if it didn't work between York and Lancaster, you couldn't do it. You couldn't do it, because we really needed to focus on that to make this process pay off. And so the federal government, as it became more involved in developing the networks, naturally had to go to somebody, and the states were better organized, and they were the natural partners for transportation policy to be organized around. And I think you started to see in the 70s and 80s and 90s some pushback, but it wasn't really well organized pushback. And so coming into this century, I think there was a determination, and I think the seeds were planted before that, that we needed to get organized as cities to make sure that our ideas weren't lost when we were having these debates, frankly, about what the priorities were. So moving around fast, moving around without congestion is certainly a good, but what is that good coming at a cost of, and where and when and to who? And so the idea that we could achieve a better balance by focusing more on active transportation, people walking around, people biking around, and needed to invest in order to support that, was one that was, an early flag that NACTO felt that they needed to carry. And there were other, kind of movements. So you think about the Complete Streets movement, that certainly dovetails with this. I think Vision Zero was certainly embraced early by NACTO, but it wasn't invented by NACTO. And it really lays the groundwork for a lot of work that cities are doing. And so having the ability to kind of push these ideas forward, get funding for these things, change the rules at the federal government is key. I'm thrilled we have a lot of NACTO alumni in DC right now in the Department of Transportation, and they're kind of helping these ideas take stock too. So I could go on for 3 hours about NACTO, but that's the main idea. And I'm really just proud that I've had a chance to provide some stewardship over the last couple of years.
So it's interesting traveling around to cities across the U.S., and a lot of them are experiencing kind of some of the same challenges as post-pandemic, with massive equity issues. How do we provide better access? How do we make sure that it's fair? We talked a little bit about the technology, making sure that it's open to everyone. But what do you see with cities going forward with NACTO? How can they kind of help that kind of I guess I keep calling it post pandemic, but it was only last year that we
Yeah.
were still kind of in this bubble um, growing because I fear that some cities are not evolving fast enough and changing fast enough, and they're going to get unfortunately left behind, and other cities seem to be ahead
Yeah.
of the curve. So how do we, kind of swim together
That's
so that
that's an
everybody
excellent
grows?
question, and it's very timely and one that NACTO is trying to work with now. And we are looking to expand the membership, and cities can join as affiliates. Transit authorities, transit operators can join as affiliates, and we're trying to create some new pathways for cities to be more involved. And so we're talking that stuff over. And I would encourage people who work with cities to follow us closely, come to the conference. We do a lot of kind of webinars, and there's a band of folks on staff who kind of travel around and have a real presence. And now with a lot of things happening in remote fashion, there's a lot of events that folks have a chance to kind of jump into. Can request some attention from NACTO. There's a lot of engagement that we put into recruiting cities. So it's not like you have to be a member of NACTO before you get any attention. But it's a big country and there's a lot of cities. So the best way to get the best attention is to join NACTO at the end of the day. We want to provide people with technical support, design guidance. We want to kind of hear their problems and process that. The thing we're trying to really think through is how much we're sounding the trumpets for things we understand well, where our core values are, where we see the country, the world really needs to go on transportation, and how much we want to listen and learn from what the experiences are in cities. And so I think we have a real recognition that not every city in North America is the same, and every city has to start from somewhere. And we don't want to alienate cities that are not in the same policy environments as some of the larger cities are, right? That have different geographies, having different configurations of roads, different geometries, and so forth, and be able to provide actual meaningful support to these cities and not just aspirations. So there's a challenge for sure, and I'm very, very pleased. We've had good conversations with the staff who focus on design, and we think it starts with that. It starts with conversations about what the issues are, having workshops and charrettes, and just kind of really drilling down and thinking about what could we do to make a situation better. We know what we think best practice is, and that probably doesn't change too much. But how do we get closer to best practice when we're in a situation which is just not there, has its own issues? And so we won't necessarily all be swimming at the same pace, but if we can swim in the right direction, everyone, that's the start. I think that's where we want to get things kicked off.
So I'd interested to hear from you a little bit about maybe where TDM, transportation demand management, sort of fits into NACTO and what you all are doing or looking to do moving forward. It's something that is important to both Rob and I specifically, but it's a really, I think, sort of growing idea here in the transportation space. So is that something NACTO is looking at? How TDM plays a role specifically?
I think it's something we need to look at more closely, and I think in general everyone needs to look at it more closely right now because, like we're saying, in the post-pandemic world, a lot of our assumptions have changed, and I think we need to think about the role TDM plays, and folks who are advocating for the commuter and the commuter's impact on the city are dealing with a different world now than they were before. But it's not a world without challenges. I think that's important for folks to understand. And I'm hopeful we can work more on empowering travel demand management agencies, entities to do planning, to really dig into planning and to organize that planning around, key objectives, not independent of MPOs and municipalities, but in a way that sort of sets the table for opportunities to try things out. And I think, that'll be a theme in a lot of what I've talked about today. We want to be able to try things out to see how they work, to bring in resources, but to do it in a way where, if we're talking about micromobility, if we're talking about rideshare, if we're talking about innovation in how we pay for transit, there's nobody who's really better situated to bring people together across multiple public jurisdictions, but also people in industry and the general public. So I have a passion, a little bit of a passion for, never missing an opportunity to push forward this idea that, mobility as a service can be a real thing if we just keep engaging in all the different silos and tying the different silos together. And that has a lot to do with people's willingness to, be the guinea pigs a little bit right now. They're going to try out this fare medium. They're going to make trips with more than one mode. They're going to kind of rethink about the way they organize a week, at least on a trial basis or, an interim basis, to see if, we can learn some lessons, we can prove it, we can come back to it. And you need to be able to recruit a public to do that. You need to, certainly government can help, but you need to be able to recruit people who are running businesses and people who are working in businesses to do that. And, it's nice when opportunities walk in the door, but we need to really get organized around that kind of thing, I think. And so I think that for me is a real role that we should all converge on, whether it's me with my city hat or NACTO hat or me just as a member of the general public. I think that we really rely on folks who have a track record of innovating in TDM to really carry that forward. So that's my 2 cents.
No, I think that's great. Obviously I've been involved for a long time with TDM, and I think one of the beauties of it is it's a one size does not fit all approach. And certain cities' public transit system is phenomenal, and other cities, they are better with bike ped than they are some of the transit. So it's what kind of makes sense, and not trying to shoehorn this is what you shall do or should do. And unfortunately, some of the DOT guidelines historically have been that way, which is why some of the cities have struggled over time. Thinking about kind of moving forward in Philadelphia and the things we've been talking about. So we have a big anniversary for the country in 2026, which I can't believe is only 3 years away. And, Philadelphia's done a phenomenal job. We got the World Cup, Major League Baseball All-Star Game. We were joking, ACT International Conference, which Andy and I are both actively involved with, will be in Philadelphia. That was intentional. Lots of other activities going on. And I'd love to hear, kind of what planning is going on now as it relates to mobility. I know there's a group that has been meeting, but love to hear any thoughts on that. And obviously other cities are going to be celebrating, Boston, many cities.
Yeah. So yeah, this is truly exciting. So if we focus on the 250th, we're working with our folks on the budget office to identify some projects that we could just get done. We just have enough time to get it done for 250th. So some of the stuff is kind of in the works, but there'll be a focus on some of the historic areas of the city to stand up a few projects which create more of this public realm. We're working on a project in the Old City. So this is Market Street between 2nd and 5th Street to really reorganize the way things work there. And so that's one in particular I'm so excited about because, that is the historic gateway for America. When you look at what's around there, you've got, Independence Hall, you've got Christ Church, you've got Betsy Ross's house. It's really all right there. And people really don't, if they've got their tour book, they know that they can go there, but it doesn't present itself that way. And we can create something which is, a bit more plaza-like, we feel like, for people to really just be there and enjoy that space. So hopefully we can kick that off, and folks who are here for that birthday can be there and celebrate. I'm interested in a handful of other projects like that around the city. And I'm not going to say too much about them because I can't promise them to anybody, but there's a few locations where I'm trying to target some investments to create places for people to be and experience. It's a little unfortunate. It was never going to be ideal, even from the beginning, but we're trying to move forward with the I-95 CAP project. But unfortunately, I don't think I'm making news. That one's not going to be done in 2026, but that was one that we had hoped maybe we could at least say, look over there, it's coming together, it's built. But that one got away from us. But there's a handful of other things that we're doing for some of the other events. So around the World Cup, there will be some investments in order to create some training facilities in South Philadelphia. So that's moving forward. There's got a fair amount of momentum behind that. And for people who use FDR Park, I think there were some concerns about what it might be like. People wanted to kind of preserve the legacy space. I think the key elements they're going to be fine. People are going to really be able to enjoy that park on a regular basis, but there'll be some great facilities there and a real upgrade and facelift for that whole area. So that's really exciting too. And then, a lot of this is kind of what we do for the events as they come. I mean, I think, developed a reputation that we know how to throw a party when people come through, whether it's the political conventions or the Pope's coming through, or, we've had the NFL here for a number of things over time. So I think, some of this is just running a good operation. And with our partners throughout the region and PennDOT, I think we've really got a bit of a feather we can put in our cap that, unlike many cities, especially cities of this size, we've got it down to a bit of a art here. So we're really excited about all that stuff.
Yeah, that's going to be an exciting, long year.
Yeah.
Yes, celebrating in Philadelphia.
Well, and speaking of parties, hopefully for the two of you in Philadelphia, there's a big party you're handling early February, maybe a Super Bowl parade tied to it.
Yeah, I'm really excited about that. This is one of those years where it's got to be, right? It's got to be. Everything's falling into place. All the signs are right. And I'll discount the last 3 weeks, but if we can turn to 180 on the next month, that all sins are forgiven.
It's just three games.
That's right.
Yeah. Fair enough. Awesome. Well, Mike, thanks for joining us. It's been a great conversation. Love to hear more, about what's happening in Philadelphia in the future, what's been happening. And I loved also the history of NACTO too. I don't think I'd heard it in a succinct way before. So all this was great. Thanks for being on. And, certainly to you, good luck on everything you're coming up against 2026 or everything up until that as well.
My pleasure. Thank you both. Appreciate seeing you again, Rob, and good luck with everything, guys.
Great. Thanks,
Mike. And to all of our listeners, make sure you subscribe to the podcast. You can do that at betweenthelines.io, and that way you get an email when we have a new episode out like this one. And make sure you give us a like, a follow, a rating wherever you listen to podcasts or watch them. YouTube and Spotify, you can actually watch our faces do the talking. It's just sometimes a good change of pace. Well, once again, thanks for being on, Mike. Rob, as always, thanks for being here. And to everyone, all of our listeners, we'll see you again next time.
Thanks for joining us on this week's episode of Between the Lines with Andy Keaton. Be sure to subscribe to hear next week's episode and check out our exclusive commuter playlists on Spotify.